In On Point 1, we revisit the history of India's national song and national anthem amid the current political debate over Vande Mataram. What were the roles of Tagore, Nehru and Subhas Chandra Bose in the journey of Jana Gana Mana? In On Point 2, we examine India's changing obesity map and why it is no longer limited to big cities. A new NFHS data shows a sharp rise in overweight and obesity, particularly in rural India. And now let's take a quick look at the headlines. Supreme Court constitutes a 5-member committee headed by its former judge R. Subhas Reddy to conduct independent inquiry into allegations of excessive use of force by police and security personnel during the July 20th student protests. Setback for Jharkhand government as High Court stays order cancelling 11th and 13th JPSC exams and appointments. Court directs the government to file its counter affidavit within 15 days. Asim Munir becomes Pakistan's Chief of Defence Forces, consolidating control over all 3 services. New position grants enhanced constitutional protection for Munir. Entire country is debating Vande Mataram and the alleged disrespect that the Congress has shown towards it. In political circles, Vande Mataram is being treated as a song that was deprived of its due place by a conspiracy. Vande Mataram is one of the most beautiful songs sung in Ode to Mother India. But in this program, I have decided to focus on how Jana Gana Mana was adopted. Vande Mataram was written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and became a war cry for all the patriots in the country. The song has a soul, it evokes a beautiful emotion. Similarly, Jana Gana Mana was written by another great son of India. His name is Rabindranath Tagore. He penned Jana Gana Mana in 1911 and at the time of rendition, never thought it would go on to become the national anthem of the country. Song encompasses geography, demography, and history of the subcontinent. National anthem touches nationalism from a different angle. Let me take you through some unknown facets leading to the Constituent Assembly adopting it as a national anthem. Tagore in Tattva-Bodhini Patrika went on to describe the song, national anthem, Jana Gana Mana, as a Brahma Sangeet. In 1941, Nehru requested Tagore to write a national anthem, and Tagore did not immediately refer to Jana Gana Mana as national anthem. In 1942, Subhas Chandra Bose, while inaugurating the Free India Centre in Europe, chose Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem. Much before it was adopted, Indian National Army started to sing it in Southeast Asia. First version under Bose's instruction were rendered by Mumtaz Hussain and Abid Hassan, and score was set by Ram Singh Thakur. Nehru, in Constituent Assembly on 25th August 1948, said, the question of national anthem, tune to be played by orchestra and bands became urgent for us after 1947 as countries wherever India was recognized as an independent nation, they were asking for the anthem. Rajendra Prasad on 24th January 1950 announced inside Constituent Assembly that Vande Mataram will be honoured equally with Jana Gana Mana and shall have equal status. It was sung inside the house and Purnima Banerjee led the chorus. Subsequently, Nehru wrote, quote unquote, I have a feeling of satisfaction that I was partly responsible for this choice, not only because it is against national song, but also because it is a constant reminder to all our people of Rabindranath Tagore. On the other hand, Vande Mataram was written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in Sanskrit and Bengali, first published in his literary journal Bangadarshan on November 7, 1875. It included in his famous 1882 novel Anantumat. It became part of it. It was first sung in 1896 in Calcutta session of Congress. The song was used by patriots against the division of Bengal in 2 units. British banned it inside schools. Vande Mataram was integral to freedom struggle like DNA is to our body, whereas Jana Gana Mana arrived on scene through a different process. It was approved by the Act of Parliament. My question is very different. You cannot pit Jana Gana Mana against Vande Mataram. Both songs were written by the sons of India, great sons of India. Let me introduce not politicians, but historians. Hindol Singh Gupta, poet Professor Ashwini Kumar, and Professor Arup Chatterjee, author and a historian. Thank you all of you for joining me. And let me begin with Hindol. Hindol, you know, Vande Mataram is being, or controversy is being casted in a sense that injustice has been done. So my question is different. Is contemporary politics subsuming history? And in this narrative of conversation, the role which Tagore played or Subhas Chandra role played in Jana Gana Mana, why is it being discounted?
Let me just say that there is no, I mean, no matter what kind of politics you do, history will come into play. There is no politics without history. So, you know, to keep history sacrosanct and suggest that it should not get into politics, I don't think that's perhaps possible. Certainly, it's not possible in a country like India, where at every turn of political conversation, there are aspects of history that are not, you know, in some senses, things of the past, but they are very much alive in our contemporary conversations. Look, I mean, I think that the history about Vande Mataram is very, very clear. There was a particular reason due to which it became controversial, and we can talk about that reason. And the Congress party at that time actually only effected a compromise solution to try and bring all parts of society into the national movement. I want to highlight and underline, though, that that compromise failed. And as Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel realized by the time independence came and right before independence, that no matter how much compromise is offered on the table, the Muslim League and Jinnah would not be appeased, no matter what you do. So all of this then, you know, the poor Vande Mataram got stuck into this controversy. But having said that, I do think Jana Gana Mana is actually in many ways a perfect anthem. So I would not, at least as a historian, pitch the two against each other. I don't think that's very valuable. I do think Vande Mataram is extremely powerful. It evokes something that Jana Gana Mana actually cannot evoke, a particular kind of almost transcendental fervor. We cannot forget, and I dare say we should not forget, that young men as young as 16 and younger went to the gallows singing Vande Mataram. We cannot forget this, and we should never forget this. We forget this at our peril. Having said all of that, I think Jana Gana Mana is particularly apt as a national anthem for India. And, you know, like I said, I do not pitch the two against each other.
Okay. Your opening comments, Professor Ashwini Kumar, and our national song and national anthem at variance from a sociological point of view. From the point of view of poetics, how would you encapsulate or imagine them both?
So before I begin with the poetics, I can see Arup also here, and Hindol. I mean, like, so beautifully Hindol, you know, spoke about Vande Mataram as the soul force of the nation. For me, on the lighter note first, it seems like we are back to Bengal again. I mean, like, what Bengal thinks today, India will think tomorrow. It seems like, the story of Bengal, because I come from Bihar and very proud Bihari belonging to Bengal, So for me, this separation hasn't happened. So consider myself, a Bengali too. So on that lighter note, I'm very happy that, Bengal has become the center of discussion. At least, both of them, look at, the poetic fervor of, Anand Math, and then also look at Tagore, So this is where the very poetics of, Jana Gana Mana And this is where I was just remembering, what happened to Vande Mataram, where did it disappear in the sense of inclusion and the soul force of the nation after 1925? If you recall, perhaps historians know it better than me, that until 1925, the great Hindustani classical singer Vishnu Digamba Sahab used to sing in Raag Cafe Vande Mataram at every Adhivation conference of Congress until 1925. So today what's happening is like the ghost of the history is haunting us. And especially after 1925 onwards, when India got into this partition mode. So this is where I'm remembering Guljar Sahib famous Najm, मुझे आजकल हिंदुस्तान में दो हिंदुस्तान दिखते हैं. Is it the time that we should pit national anthem against national song, or should we think about one Hindustan? So in a larger historical context, the poetics of Vande Mataram, the poetics of national anthem Jana Gana remind us that the partition is still there, partition is unsettled, and the ghost of partition back. And this is where we need to rethink about 2 stanza, 3 stanza, and in fact Jana Gana Mana is just 1 stanza. I mean, a historian must correct me that Tagore wrote 5 stanzas. And when it reached, Subhas Babu in 41, 43, I mean, like he called it Qaumi Tarana. Qaumi Tarana, perhaps time has come when we should merge both songs and call it once again Qaumi Tarana. And that will, fit into the spirit of constitutional patriotism and also the soul force of the nation. And that is why the young revolutionary, the Gen Z of that time sang, like Anusilan Samiti members and others, so fervently, so passionately, releasing the repressed voice of the nation. So this is where I would just, come with my opening remarks.
Let me go across to Professor Arup Chatterjee, your opening remarks on this. Even Tagore defined Jana Gana Mana as a Brahmo Sangit. I was just going through a couple of books. People say that, Vande Mataram is also, Vande Mataram has deeper connotation with the Indian subcontinent as a mother, or in terms of nativity or nourishment. But when we look at, Bharat Bhagya Bitata or Jai Ho, even a lot of serious scholars have said that, that's a subtle reference to divinity even in Jana Gana Mana. And Tagore, in one of the patrikas, he said, it reminds me of Brahmo Sangeet. So he frames Jana Gana Mana differently at that point of time. Prabodhani Patrika.
Thank you, Karthikeya, for that question and your warm welcome. I highly resonate with 2 of my fellow panelists, Hindol and Professor Ashwini Kumar here. Since you asked a very pointed question of me about Tagore, now I think it's become somewhat unfashionable to acknowledge this in public nowadays, but I will nonetheless. Tagore was a Brahmo. So it is, of course, not surprising to find many elements and indeed deliberate elements of Brahmo Sangeet in Rabindranath Tagore. He wrote famously Gitanjali, which won him the Nobel Prize. And Gitanjali is to a nameless, faceless, formless divinity. As for this polarity that has started to exist between Vande Mataram and Jana Gana Mana, I think on the one hand there is a productive epistemic polarity, an intellectual polarity, which you have already referred to. That is the polarity or the difference between dualism and non-dualism. Brahmo Sangeet, by definition, is in reverence to Lord Brahma, or elements of Brahmic, if that's the right word I'm looking for, elements of a Brahmic cosmic order, and dualist poetry of the sort that Vande Mataram is directly in reverence to Mother Kali, or forms of Shakti that Bengal is very eminent for. Now, what strikes me as very interesting, I wouldn't say ironic or tragic, but simply interesting, is that the kind of epistemic universe that Shakti worship implied around the time of 1905, wherein Vande Mataram was picked up by somebody like Maulana no less, Maulana Muhammad Akram Khan. And he sought to examine how Vande Mataram represents several elements, almost in the order of Darashiko, one might argue. How Vande Mataram represents several, traditional elements of both Hindu and Muslim society. And as my panelists have, our fellow panelists have already hinted at the fact, it became the war song during the partition of Bengal in 1905. So it strikes me as very interesting and very paradoxical that the partition of Bengal in 1905 that became arguably the blueprint for a lot of the partition of 1947. In these two episodes, Vande Mataram starts playing two very, very different roles. Now, whether that is a natural process of evolution, I really doubt, because as far back as 1937, Pandit Nehru is writing letters to Rajendra Babu, Netaji Subhas Bose, and in a letter to Bose, he particularly reveals that he's been reading translations of Anandamath, and just goes to show the kind of scholarly commitment that the man had. And he's reading these translations to ascertain the true values that a critic of Vande Mataram might ascribe to that song, placing it in the context of the novel, which was not the original habitation of the song. The song was integrated into the novel much later. And Nehru says that it is my speculation that there are, of course, newsensical elements from the separatists who are trying to create unnecessary ruckus around Vande Mataram, particularly, he was referring to Jana here. And that goes to show that even Nehru was very serious about Vande Mataram in 1948. He does not leave any room for doubt. He says that no doubt Vande Mataram is the preeminent national song of India. He says that's in the Constituent Assembly. And just a year before that, or 15th or 14th August rather, 11 p.m., Sucheta Kriplani ji sings Vande Mataram. And you know who's recommended her to sing that? It is Pandit Nehru, who during this organization of whatever is going to happen on the 14th and 15th of August, he's written a week before that to Rajendra Prasad Babu saying that let Sucheta Kriplani sing Vande Mataram followed by Jana Gana Mana. So I'm very curious to understand what would be the future of this career of polarity between Vande Mataram and Jana Gana Mana. I would like to share this personal experience of mine. I grew up with a little bit of musical training, and it always surprised me why I learned Jana Gana Mana when I was. I
also find this contrast slightly unreal, because if you look at the works of Rabindranath Tagore, I mean to say, I have no words as a little man to describe what he wrote, how much he wrote, what he did. I mean to say, from Amar Shonar Bangla, Ekla Chalo, I mean to say, I just fall short like a little ant, on the sort of work which Rabindranath Tagore has written. But what really surprised me, Hindol, and something which I again referred in the papers, Jawaharlal Nehru, from the context of Jana Gana Mana, was thinking of how to marry it with an orchestra, the military band. So, which means that there was a discontinuity. The imagination of Vande Mataram in context of freedom struggle and birth of a nation, and how will it be played in the Western countries, in the embassies, where military bands were integral to the music of the nation states in Europe. That I found it pretty interesting, and those were his words in the in his letter. And in 1948, if I am not wrong, it was played in UN, even before it got adopted, because people were saying, "Chanai kya?"
I mean, there's obviously a historical context to this. Pandit Nehru is the quintessential internationalist in the Trinity, in some senses, that won us freedom. And I'm, of course, talking about Gandhi, Patel, and Nehru. And Nehru among them is one person who's constantly thinking about India's positionality in the world space, and also about nitty-gritties about India's positionality, like you mentioned, about whether something fits into an army band orchestra or not, and so on and so forth. And Nehru imbibes all of these ideas, of course, and this way of thinking from his, from his upbringing, from his education, from his way of looking at the world, and so on and so forth. I think this part about it being a good fit as a military orchestral, a song, so to speak, is really an instrumentalized way of thinking. I mean, I don't think we should read anything deeper into this, but for the fact that Nehru saying, well, here we are in a sort of, at that time still, a sort of Anglo-Saxon dominated world in some senses. There are, roles that a newly independent India has to play. It has found space not only in the bigger committee of nations, but also, if you will, Kartikeya, smaller committees of nations, so to speak, which is where all this performative aspects come into play. I'm actually far more worried and far more, and I would worry about this idea that a compromise that, and my fellow panelists mentioned this, a compromise that was attempted before independence to assuage and appease a constituency, so to speak. In some senses, that conversation seems to have never ended, and it's going on even in 2026. The reference made to the first partition of Bengal in this aspect is particularly valuable, I think, and I thank my fellow colleague who mentioned it on the panel, because please remember, the transcendental aspect, the transcendental patriotic aspect of this song, Vande Mataram, had been going on in the larger consciousness, certainly of Bengal, but also I think in many parts of India since that time. And to have this debate again in 2026 on whether we can sing the full song or not, or who likes it, who doesn't like it, whether there are, references to God. Let me say this, Kartikeya, I mean, we should not forget, as people interested in history, that there are more than 60 countries in the world where their national song or big anthem in some way or the other refers to the idea of God. Now, please remember, even in the Star Spangled Banner, there is a verse that refers to God. What are they talking about? Obviously, they're talking about, quote unquote, the Christian God. And it's not a problem for anyone in the US or in various other countries where such songs have references to the divine or to divinity. But in our country, somehow we get constantly mired with this. I think this is extremely reductive. And for anybody who feels that, somehow they're being deeply insulted because there's a reference to a divinity in a song that, where, like I said, I mean, very, very young people in our country, I would say almost children, had the courage to go to the gallows of the colonial state with the song in their lips and in their heart. If we don't find it in our hearts to respect that, and like the Samajwadi Party MLA once did in Uttar Pradesh, walk out saying, I cannot accept this, then, I mean, I'm sorry to say that this is truly fatal for the future of our country. This kind of thought, I don't think, should be encouraged. I think we should all look beyond such narrow ideas and look to larger aspects. I never comment on individual political parties. I'm not here to comment on why this party did this or that party that did that. I'm not interested. But as individuals, as Indians, we must have the courage and indeed the conviction to look beyond such issues. It's been way too long. We can't be discussing this again in 2026.
Okay, Professor Ashwini Kumar, there is also one aspect, because Hindol has spoken in great detail on this. I'm not going to come out of this conversation. There is always an honor clause in this entire two-stanza controversy. It does not specify it. And it doesn't specify it. Whether you should be singing 3 stanzas, 4 stanzas, 5 stanzas, 1 stanza. Did you notice that, sir?
Yeah, I did notice, and this is very interesting. This is very interesting that the Vande Mataram, I mean, like, how many stanzas? So for me, patriotism is not a quarter patriotism, or like, pint, or like, half patriotism.
Yes.
Either there is patriotism, like Tagore said, and I'm sharing with the fellow panelists here that it's really paradoxical. A Derridian aporia, I'm using a heavy academic term, deconstructionist, in the sense that, imagine, that Tagore composing music for, Jana Gana Mana, Vande Mataram. So in that sense, if you look at, Tagore was opposed to nationalism as an ideology and an instrument of power. So both these poems are actually, maybe, nationalists won't like me, but, patriots would love us because both these songs are patriotic songs, because this is the soul force of the nation. And interestingly, in the constitutional and legal universe, I was mentioning today, this morning with you also, that it's very interesting that the Swansea Committee drafted, list of fundamental duties. In the first duty, there is a reference to respecting national anthem, but not national song. Even in this, amendment to the Act, National Honor Act, there is no that kind of parity. You see that the journey of these two poems are actually the journey of the nation. And this is where we have to be careful that if, the ghost of partition continues, and if we start thinking about separatism and also fundamentalism of a different kind, where mere reference to, I'm just, trying to point out in terms of what I call Nirguniya and Saguniya. See, Jana Gana Mana is Nirgun song and Vande Mataram is a Sagun song. If you go by our mythic Bhakti traditions, you can see how Bhakti tradition is being reflected in these two songs. So let us respect these two streams, poetic streams, and the soul of the nation in terms of both Nirguniya and Saguniya. There is no conflict here. There is no controversy here. Whether we sing two stanzas or we sing the whole song.
Okay, let me reverse it. Let me ask this question to Professor Arup Chatterjee, sir. In terms of historicity, why do you think Bose, Subhas Chandra Bose went for Jana Gana Mana, and at that point of time when Nehru wrote a letter to Rabindranath Tagore ji, why wasn't he so certain and sure on the Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem? There was no immediate reply because the song had already been written, and then subsequently he passed away. So what is your assessment of that, that sort of a position? No one talks about it, and I find it very, very amusing that these two great people are outside the conversation of Vande Mataram and Jana Gana Mana. Rabindranath Tagore and Subhas Chandra Bose. It gets reduced to 2 or 3 people and the debates in Constituent Assembly, and it finishes,
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's like going slightly backwards. We haven't mentioned it today, although it is relatively well known now. That it was Rabindranath Tagore who one of the first famous people who gave a rendition of Vande Mataram back in 1895. It was
Professor, I think there's a network issue. Hindol, can you take this question? There's a network issue with Arup.
I think, I think we cannot have this conversation without talking about Subhas Chandra Bose and Rabindranath Tagore, for the simple reason that, remember, Subhas Chandra Bose indeed was a great proponent of Jana Gana Mana, and also the fact that he was one of the people who supported the fact that, to a degree, the compromise arrived at on Vande Mataram should be, some instances carried forward, because people within his forge, so to speak, had actually also raised some questions about its applicability. I mean, we cannot deny this, nor should we try to erase this, right? As far as Tagore is concerned, I think, look, Tagore is a Brahmo, as has been mentioned in this program also, and much of what he is writing, and if you look at what the oeuvre of Tagore, for instance, I mean, you cannot listen to Jana Gana Mana and not think of Ananda Loke, Mongola Loke, just as an example. This idea that there is this pervading force around the universe which sort of is lifting all boats, so to speak. So, I mean, this is impossible to ignore. I mean, and Tagore's influence as a humanist is impossible to ignore. However, I want to point out that when the partition of Bengal happened, Tagore was one of the people who was truly saddened by the partition of Bengal. And this has, should be underlined. So when we have this conversation, and Vande Mataram was very much part of the sort of language and the grammar that were of resistance to the partition of Bengal. So therefore, to suggest that, Tagore is on one side of this debate with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and somebody else is on the other side of this debate I don't think is a very accurate picture. I think the picture is far more complicated.
Okay, and closing comments from Professor Ashwini Kumar. If there has to be a poem on Vande Mataram, what will that poem be, sir?
I mean, like I will go back to none other than Subhas Babu. He said that Subhas Sukh Chan. Remember in Hindustani he said, and they sang, INS sang in Shubh Sukh Chan ki barkha barse, Bharat bhagya hai jaga, Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha Dravida Utkal Banga. Time has come. We need to adopt Hindustani. We need to think with more inclusivity. And, both these songs should become part of our national consciousness and also unconsciousness. This is where there will be no politics, no controversy.
Thank you. Thank you, Indul, for joining me. Thank you, Professor Ashwini Kumar. And, Professor Arup, he could just join us briefly because there was a network issue. So I thank him for our viewers. And the entire idea of this conversation was to get real historians, people who understand history, semantics, poetry, to talk about two very important songs of this country, Jana Gana Mana and Vande Mataram. So this was on point one. To my viewers, in on point two, I'm going to examine the India's changing obesity map and why it is no longer limited to big cities. The fallout from the deadly ambush on the church leaders in Manipur is now rapidly escalating across the hill districts.
Unfortunately, the government has not taken appropriate action still.
Commitment to the stories that come out from Northeast, and we'll continue to cover them in depth and entirety.
News 9, in your interest.
A crisis that has shaken the foundation of our education system and left over 22 lakh students in a state of absolute despair.
कटोरा लेके नौजवान भीख मांगता रहे, यही चाहते हैं मोदी जी.
Mental agony, the mental stress that they will have to go through.
देखिए, इसमें सीबीआई जांच कर रही है. सीबीआई को पूरा साथ हमारी पुलिस देगी.
India's obesity is no longer just an urban story. New data from the National Family Health Survey 2023-24 shows a sharp rise in the share of Indians who are overweight or obese, and one of the biggest changes is happening in rural India. Today, 30.7% of women and 27.3% of men aged 15 to 49 are overweight or obese. That's up from 24% of women and 22.9% of men in the previous survey. The urban-rural gap still exists, but the rural numbers are rising rapidly. Among women, 42.8% in urban areas are overweight or obese compared to 25.5% in rural areas. For men, The figure is 36.3% in urban areas and 23% in rural areas. But here's the change. In 2005-06, only 7.2% of rural women were overweight or obese. Today, that figure is 3 times higher. So what is driving this change? Doctors say this isn't simply about people earning more or making poor lifestyle choices. India's food environment itself is changing. Packaged and ultra-processed foods are becoming cheaper and more widely available, not just in cities, but in small towns and villages. At the same time, physical activity is declining. Mechanization of farm work, greater use of motorized transport, screen time, stress and poor sleep are all contributing to what experts describe as an obesogenic environment. And rural markets are changing rapidly. Better roads, expanding retail networks, e-commerce are bringing packaged snacks and refined carbohydrates deeper into rural India, including ultra-processed food. At the same time, healthier foods can remain comparatively expensive, like United States, where you have food deserts. Everything packaged is available, but fresh food is absent. But there's another warning sign in the data. Blood sugar. Around 20.9% of men and 17.8% of women now have high or very high blood sugar readings. And the rural-urban gap here is much narrower than it is for obesity. Why does that matter? Because Indians can develop metabolic problems at a lower BMI than many Western populations. That means looking fit does not necessarily mean being metabolically healthy. Experts are therefore calling for greater focus on waist circumference and metabolic health rather than relying only on BMI. And the policy response may need to go beyond awareness campaigns. Experts are calling for front-of-pack warning labels, taxes and subsidies, better nutrition standards in schools, and routine BMI and waist checks in primary healthcare. The question now is, can India change its food environment and prevent obesity before it turns into diabetes, heart disease, and a much larger public health crisis? On this issue, I am joined by Professor Rama Baru, OP Jindal Global University, Dr. Shumon Chakrabarti, Research Fellow, IFPRI. Let me straight away go to Professor Rama Baru, Madam. My question to you is, why is this happening? Why is rural obesity on rise? What is the policy aspect or the intervention, I may use the word, leading to this crisis, ma'am?
Thank you very much, Karthikeya. I want to make a couple of points. One, that yes, overall obesity rates are growing. I think this whole rural-urban differential is narrowing. But I think there is also a south-north divide in this whole obesity data. Southern states are experiencing higher rates of obesity as compared to the northern states. It's also a very important issue that there is a gender divide in this, that women seem to be having a higher rate of obesity as compared to men. But the other important way to look at all of this is to disaggregate, as I said, between the south and the north. The southern states, as you know, has seen far more, economic development, also the penetration of markets, and I'll come to that a little later. Also mechanization of agriculture, the lifestyle of a more sedentary lifestyle. But the other very important thing which we need to understand in the rural context is the fact that the public distribution system, and here I want to bring in the social stratification into the discussion, which is to say that even the poorer among the rural population, you are seeing the creeping of obesity. And the reason for this is that the PDS provides very heavy carbohydrate-rich food. So whether it is rice, wheat, sugar, you find that the balanced diet, which is absolutely required for not only combating undernutrition, but also overnutrition of a wrong kind, is a very serious issue. Now, a lot of the public health messages are eat a balanced diet. Like you spoke about the food deserts. In India also, you have this problem of not having access to a balanced meal. The cost of dals is an issue. The fact that PDS does not actually, in some states they do give millets, but then there is this whole demonstration effect of what good nutrition should look like. So brown rice gets replaced by highly polished white rice. Populations that once ate millet because that was the cheapest food available to them feel that it is not befitting their status. They in a sense, there is this imitation of the middle classes, the consumerist classes. So there is that element as well in the decisions that people make about food. You know, we underestimate the role of young adults and children and the way they influence family eating habits. So, in fact, there was a very interesting study done by Dr. Amita Bhaviskar from the Delhi School of Sociology, where she, actually documents and you spoke about this in your introduction, the penetration of the processed food industry into remote rural areas. So whether it is the Maggi noodles or even the Coca-Colas, which have now, if you look in the market, have resized themselves into smaller bottles, which is cheaper. So, many years ago, this Prahalad wrote about race to the bottom of the pyramid. So I think the food industry has really, really outsmarted, and this is true of even the shampoo and other industries. They have created smaller packages for which people can access. So even chips, you can buy a big packet of Lay's chips, you can also buy a small packet of Lay's chips. Plus, of course, the eating habits of deeply fried snacks, which we all Indians love. So whether it is your samosa or your pakoda or your vadas, the point really is these are all fat-rich foods.
Yes.
So you do find this as a huge complex issues or set of issues that are fueling the obesity epidemic.
I understand, it's like Sunehra Gehu, Chamakdar Chawal. Let me straight away go to Dr. Shumon Chakrabarti. There's one aspect of this study which says that in terms of food map, there is very little division now between a rural diet and an urban diet. You may have a rural economy and an urban economy, but the overlapping has started to take place. My question is different. Is it primarily related with the ultra processed food, or you think that the healthier foods are becoming expensive and the cheaper carbohydrate based options are becoming cheaper, and it started to affect rural India as well?
Thanks for having me. First of all, that's a really great question and something that we think about quite deeply. So let me start by saying that in India, when you compare the diets of rural and urban India, the key difference emerges in the affordability factor and the availability factor. So you have a lot more foods available throughout the year in urban India, and people can afford them. So when people get richer, they tend to consume more of everything. Now it really depends on the consumer's preferences as to what they choose to eat, right? So we've seen throughout our surveys that while people do consume more, say, animal source foods, and they consume more vegetables and fruits if they get more money, they also choose to eat more ultra processed foods and ready to eat products, right? The same thing is happening and playing out in rural India as we speak. So as incomes have increased, what we've noticed is that there's been an increase in consumption of ultra processed foods, and which is kind of outpacing the increase in the healthier foods like fruits and vegetables. And that is chiefly driven by the preferences of the households, right? Now that could come from either having lesser knowledge about what's healthy, which is because, as you know, nutrition in Indian schools is barely touched upon. It's not a subject taught like mathematics. It's not taught like geography. Nutrition is barely touched upon. Even students don't know exactly what an actual healthy diet constitutes and what are the latest evidences around that. At the same time, there's a parallel trend that's developing, which is lower physical activity. If you look at the WHO estimates, adults have been more inactive in India over time, and this is also happening in rural India. And as the data plays out in BMI, you'll see the same data play out in physical activity. Women are probably twice as inactive as men in India. especially in the range of, I think, 18 years to 65 years. And I think that's also true for older adults as well. So you see the trends are kind of mirroring each other. Just to add to the points that were made earlier, those were all excellent points. I would just like to say that, so BMI is just a function of, say, three variables, right? There's one which is what your body needs to survive and sustain. That's energy, right? So your body would spend energy just to stay alive and to fight diseases. So in India, there used to be a higher disease burden before. Now, with the advent of, say, the Swachh Bharat mission and other kinds of, say, even clean water that's more readily available, you're seeing some of these diseases drop. So the general metabolic load on the body has decreased a bit. So demands on energy just to stay alive and healthy are slightly lower. At the same time, you have the emergence of better roads, better communication. People have access to vehicles. People are buying more bicycles. So they're less physically active at the same time. And then the last one is what's going on the plate. What we've noticed through our surveys is that households in rural India especially tend to eat almost the same thing throughout the day. So if they cook something, they'll eat it for breakfast, they'll eat it for lunch, and they'll eat it for dinner. What's changing really is what they're eating in between. So it's the snack foods that are changing. And now if you look at the fact that historically India's always had samosas, India's had chaats, right? 2006 wasn't different. We've had that forever. That time we weren't seeing this obesity epidemic really, shoot up. So what has really changed in the food environment is what's come in. And that is in the form of greater accessibility to these ultra processed foods, right? So, and the choices that
is it access to the ultra processed food, or is it access to food all the time? As a child, I'm not a Jatayu, but I do remember in 80s when I would go back to my bua's place, she would just close the kitchen, and this was early 80s. So if the breakfast was done, then I had to wait for lunch, and once the lunch was done, Professor Baru, I had to wait for dinner. So there were cycles in which I had nothing to eat. It was not that they wouldn't feed me, but the entire thing was खा लो, उसके बाद जब दोबारा मिलेगा तब खाना. तो बीच में there was no snacking.
So if I can come in there,
yes.
We did a survey in Nalanda, right? And we actually approached this. We asked about what people eat throughout the day, and we asked about snacking occasions. And believe it or not, snacking was the single most important driver of dietary diversity, both healthy and unhealthy. So if you just measure dietary diversity by the total food categories that somebody consumes, which includes healthy and unhealthy foods, that snacking drives that tremendously across the board. So you're right there. Like if you start consuming more foods in between main meals, what you're doing essentially is adding an additional 400 calories maybe per day, right? That is enough to shift the energy balance on the other side.
Okay.
So essentially, that's one of the contributing factors.
Okay, let me go back to Professor Baru. Professor Baru, there are two things. We have a midday meal scheme throughout India. Is it very carbohydrate centric? Because when we talk about protein, it becomes such a taboo thing. Controversy eggs pe ho jati hai. Leave alone chicken and other foods which can be made part of the table. And secondly, do you think that what people at large consider a very okay food is not nutritionally dense? It's like, what did you have? I had potatoes, dal, chawal. But it might be good, but it may not be nutritionally dense and 100% required for your body. But coming to that, do you think that the government intervention is also very carbohydrate centric for children?
I think there's much diversity in midday meal schemes, and there's been a long history and debate around this. I think it was informed by originally MGR's midday meal scheme, which tried to bring a balanced diet. And in fact, the National Institute of Nutrition played a very important role to define those diets. But I think what has really been happening is the quality of midday meal programs. As you know, they're only served in government schools because they are mandated to do it. Then they introduced eggs, which was a very, very good initiative. But then that has become controversial now, and there this thing of should you serve eggs or should you not serve eggs. So midday meals necessarily may not be, and also the quality of the midday meal, the quality of cooking, the quality of serving, all those things become important. But I want to slightly shift the focus to looking at this the very important issue of not just diet diversity or availability of food, but how much food is actually being timely consumed. You see, when you look at the southern states and where women are going out to work, and I'm talking about women who are laboring women, I'm not talking about middle class professionals. What happens is the time to cook a meal has been completely reduced. So if you look at their dietary, a day in their dietary consumption, they begin maybe with a cup of chai and some maybe biscuits. Biscuits become a very important replacement in this whole story. And then they
healthy biscuits.
Yes, and then they don't eat for long hours. They may eat something like an idli or something, and then they work and they go back home, and the last meal becomes the big meal when they cook for the family. I'm talking about different types of examples. Now, what we find is that, women, you said about obesity, one is metabolic. It is a hormonal kind of change and shift. But more importantly, in our work on diabetes, we find that while they're prescribed by the doctor to do exercise, to walk at least 30 minutes a day, our built environments are not conducive to walking. And in many rural areas, there have been studies which show you that women do not feel safe to walk alone. They need to either walk in a group or they're walking with their husbands. And there is the whole gendered thing of male bonding and walking and having their own social life. So I think there is a serious impediment in our built environments. There are not adequate parks, there's not adequate, and it's worse for the working class and a little better for the middle and upper middle classes. Of course, those who go to gyms and work out, that's a completely different access to a different kind of exercise that is not available to a lot of women, even if they want to walk and exercise. So I think it's really quite complicated. And I like what you said about your aunt, your bua, closing the kitchen. When we were growing up in middle class India, there were 3 meals a day. And in the south, we had basically a 10 o'clock lunch. Then if best, there would be an idli in the evening, and then you would have a very light meal in the night. Speak to anyone who deals with obesity as clinicians. They'll tell you, please don't eat heavy in the night. But a lot of these patterns have changed. People eat late, they're drinking. I'm talking about social situation. They're eating very, very heavy, rich food at 10:30 in the night. And that is not okay. The East Asians eat by 6, and that's the end of the story. So we have enough evidence of these kinds of shifts which are not healthy for obesity.
Okay.
Clearly.
Let me take a closing comment from Dr. Shumon. Is there also a genetic aspect to it? I went through a Netflix series, I think a year ago, The Brown Heart. Okay, so so is there a genetic aspect of our metabolism in obesity?
Genetic aspect in the sense, I would say there are a couple of factors that can contribute. Number one, historically, because as you know, there have been widely documented, say, series that have shown that all the droughts that the Indian population was subjected to during the colonization, that's led to an epigenetic response of the body to want to be thrifty when it comes to storing calories in general, right? So it's basically something historical that's been pushed on the population due to all of the shocks that we suffered back then. At the same time, Indians are, because we have such a protein poor diet and our environment is such that our height potential is not currently being met. So we have a shorter population in general, which again makes it easier for us to reach a level of BMI which puts us at risk. And then all the other metabolic conditions that emerge after that start to happen. So I would just put it there. I'm not like a medical doctor by training, so I don't want to get into the details of all of that. But I think from my perspective, those two factors are definitely important.
Okay. On this note, I thank both of you for this riveting conversation on obesity, the way rural and urban divide is getting merged. But my 2 cents here is that what I've seen is, Professor Baru, that ultra-processed food in this country is being sold as a healthy food. You know, and to my shock, I realized after doing my little bit of research that, for example, the protein shake, which is now so easily available even in rural India, people are substituting it for real food, not understanding the sort of impact it has on your body. And this is not the way the bodies are absorbing protein for last 1,000 years. So everything which is ultra processed is also being projected as nice, clean or vegan, green, healthy food. I think that is where, you know, the government needs to really crack down. Thank you and good night. This is all I had on point 2. And to my viewers, there is news and many more developments awaiting on the other side of the break. Good night.
The National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, NEET UG 2026, has been completely upended following a massive paper leak scandal.